All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling a massive story, what's happening with China's real estate. And this isn't just about a market correction. We're talking about the potential end of an entire era.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. The main argument from the analyses we're looking at is this. What's happening in China right now? It's not a recession. It's not just some temporary dip you can paper over with stimulus money. Nope. This is being called a model collapse, a fundamental, structural breakdown of the entire system that's fueled China's growth for decades.
So how do you get to a model collapse? Well, first we've got to understand how the model was built in the first place. How did an entire nation, we're talking everyone from the top government officials right down to the average family, bet its entire future on property prices only ever going up?
You can actually trace the starting point back to 1998. That's the year the old welfare housing system was scrapped. All of a sudden, housing wasn't something the state just gave you, it was something you bought. It became a commodity. Then, in the 2000s, you have this massive wave of people moving to the cities, which just poured fuel on the fire. By the time we hit the 2010s, buying a property wasn't just about finding a place to live. For the growing middle class, it became the only game in town for building wealth.
And this whole thing was basically a bubble built on three huge interlocking pillars. First, you've got the local governments. They got most of their money from selling land rights, so they had every reason to want prices to go up, up, up. Then, there's the public. There was this deep-seated belief that real estate was the only safe investment, the only way to secure your family's future. And finally, you had that constant flood of people moving into cities, which created what felt like endless, unstoppable demand. All three of these things fed into each other, creating a cycle that just kept pushing prices higher.
Now this next idea really gets to the heart of how the developers operated. It's a Japanese term, jitensha sogyo, which literally translates to bicycle operation. And it's a perfect metaphor, right? You have to keep pedaling or you fall flat on your face. Developers would sell apartments in a building that was still just a blueprint, take all that pre-sale money and immediately pour it into buying land for their next project. It's a super risky, debt-fueled cycle that works as long as you're constantly moving forward. The moment you slow down, the whole thing just collapses. So you've got this incredibly fragile system, this bicycle that has to keep moving. And then the government steps in. And the irony here is that they were trying to control the bubble, to stop it from getting out of hand. But according to this analysis, the policies they chose ended up being the very things that knocked the whole system over.
It really came down to a trio of major miscalculations. First, in 2020, they rolled out the 3 red lines. This was an abrupt crackdown on credit that basically cut off the money supply for developers overnight. It was like someone reached out and just slammed on the brakes of that bicycle. Then you had the zero COVID policy, which went on for so long that it just crushed consumer confidence. People stopped wanting to make huge life decisions, like buying a home. And finally, you get this huge contradiction. The government wants to stop prices from crashing because that would cause a panic. But they also need to get rid of this massive inventory of unsold homes. You can't do both. It's an impossible situation. And what you end up with is this weird market paralysis. The whole system is basically broken, but the government is so afraid of a full-on crash and the public anger that would come with it that they can't let prices just fall to where they naturally should be. So the market is just stuck, frozen in this strange, semi-collapsed state.
And this really gets to why this time is so different. In the past, whenever China's economy hit a rough patch, they could just throw a bunch of money at it, a big stimulus package, and things would get going again. But this crisis is different. It's rooted in these deep structural problems that you just can't fix by printing more money.
I mean, just look at this number, 70%. That's the estimated chunk of an average Chinese family's wealth that's tied up in real estate. So when property values start to drop, it's not some abstract economic problem. It's a direct hit to the life savings of hundreds of millions of people. And when people feel poorer, they stop spending, and that just cripples the entire domestic economy.
And then you have a problem that no amount of government policy can ever fix. For the first time in over 60 years, China's population is actually shrinking. Think about what that means. The fundamental engine of the entire property boom, a constantly growing pool of young people needing homes, is gone, and it's not coming back. The demand side of the equation is now in permanent decline. Okay, so demand is shrinking. What about supply? Well, on that side, you have an oversupply that is just staggering. Some estimates put the number of vacant or unfinished homes at around 100 million. 100 million. When you have that much supply and demand is falling off a cliff, there's just no economic reason for prices to stay high. It defies gravity. And hey, remember that first pillar we talked about? The local governments that got rich selling land? Well, that revenue stream has completely dried up. A lot of them are basically broke. And that's a huge problem because it means they can't pay for essential services. Things like hospitals, schools, even police. It creates this vicious cycle that just grinds the local economy to a halt. So this is where the story shifts from just economics to the very real human cost, the social and political fallout. Because when a dream that an entire generation bought into suddenly shatters, the damage goes way beyond just numbers on a spreadsheet. It starts to tear at the very fabric of society. You have to understand, the Chinese middle class was already under a ton of pressure. They talk about the three big mountains, these huge financial burdens of education, healthcare, and housing. But housing was also supposed to be their salvation, their path to wealth. Now that one pillar of security is turning into a source of massive stress. The psychological foundation of the middle class is cracking.
And you can see this playing out in social trends, especially with young people. The dream of buying a home and building a future feels impossible. Combine that with record youth unemployment, and you get this widespread pessimism. It's led to this movement called lying flat, where young people basically just give up. They check out of the rat race, deciding not to pursue marriage, careers, or buying a home. It's a quiet protest born out of despair.
So the big question is, what does all this mean for political stability? Well, the analysis we're looking at is pretty careful here. In the short run, say the next few years, a big political upheaval is unlikely. The government's control over security and information is just too tight. But the long-term picture, that's a different story. The real danger isn't some dramatic revolution. It's a slow, creeping, quiet destabilization as the social contract starts to fray. And what does that quiet destabilization actually look like on the ground? It's not one big explosion. It's more like a slow decay. It's local governments not being able to provide basic services. It's the middle class losing faith in the system. It's young people giving up hope, which just makes the population decline worse. And it's the smartest, wealthiest people looking for a way out, a classic brain drain.
So when you put all these pieces together, you're left with a pretty stark conclusion. This is so much more than a housing crisis. What we're witnessing is the end of an entire era, the end of that incredible 40-year growth story. China has hit a wall, and it's a turning point they simply can't avoid.
This chart really sums it all up, doesn't it? It's a crisis that's hitting every single part of the system at once. The main engine of growth? It's stalled out. The wealth of the nation's households? It's taking a huge hit. The finances of local governments? Basically collapsed. And the demographic future? Well, it's shrinking. Every single one of those pillars we talked about is now broken.
And that leads us to the final, bottom-line assessment from this analysis. All the old tricks, the old tools they used to fix problems in the past, they're not going to work this time. The old model is broken beyond repair. China is now forced to figure out a completely new way forward, a whole new economic and social model for the country.
Which leaves us with this huge, unanswered question. For decades, the entire world has been shaped by China's incredible, seemingly unstoppable rise. But that rise was built on this specific growth model. And now, that model is broken. So the question that matters for everyone, both inside and outside of China, is what rises from the ashes?